welcome back to Reviews by Beth, and today I'm going to be reviewing the long-awaited release Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the latest Hunger Games book and I have literally been looking forward to this for so long. I actually read The Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes earlier this year. I think it was my first read of 2025. Even though I'd watched the film, I read the book earlier this year, and I obviously read the Hunger Games trilogy when I was much younger. I think I was about 10 or 11. Fell in love with the books. They were amazing, and I have waited for this book for so long. I pre-ordered it. I wanted to come on the day of its release, and I literally read this in like 2 days flat because it was so good. Now, if you don't know what this book is about, it's about Haymitch's games. So we obviously know that Haymitch wins his games because he is the victor that takes care of Peter and Katniss in the other games, but he has a big problem with alcohol, and he obviously is very traumatized from his past, and we don't know what his past is. But now we do, because we have a whole book dedicated to it. Now, I love how Suzanne Collins keeps giving us these nuggets of information and of people and of characters that we see throughout all of the books. So this is really interesting because I feel like this book has the most references to all of the other books included in the trilogy, and also with the prequel in Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes. So Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes is about Snow and how he kind of grew up and became this awful dictator and his twisted mind, and we get to see inside of that, and actually it's not black and white. He wasn't just awful to begin with, and how his views are shaped, especially towards District 12. But with Haymitch, this is such a sad story because we know that his games were the 50th games, so the second quarter quell, and we are told in Catching Fire that there's double the amount of tributes in this games. So there's 48 tributes instead of 24, which in itself is so hard. And I think she does a really good job of this with, obviously it's about the Capitol and Snow and oppression and propaganda, but really she's weaving in things that we need to learn from today's society. She's telling us things, maybe don't listen to everything you say, propaganda is out there, the truth is warped by the government. She starts off the book with 4 quotes, immediately setting the scene for this book. And one of them I'm just going to read out. "A truth that's told with bad intent beats all the lies you can invent." A quote by William Blake. I mean, if that doesn't just tell this whole story, then I don't know what did. Sunrise on the Reaping takes you through all of your favourite characters. You get to see Haymitch. You also see a few other characters from Catching Fire. We see Beatty, we see Wyrus, we see Mags, and I'm not going to tell how we get into those characters, but we do see them. We also see Effie Trinket, and it's so nice to see how their relationship evolved. But we also see how District 12 was about 25 years before Katniss was there, and how the Reapings have changed and how have societal values changed. So we get to see each kind of jump from 12. So we see obviously the 10th Hunger Games with Lucy Gray, we see the 50th one with Haymitch, and then we obviously see the 74th and 75th and 76th Hunger Games with Katniss and Peter. Now, this really broke my heart into two. I mean, if you want a good cry, this is gonna do it for you. I literally, throughout this book, I was sobbing because she really does a good job of connecting you to these characters that you already love, and ripping your heart out and doing things to them that are just brutal. Now, I know we go into this book knowing that Haymitch wins the games. Obviously we know that. I mean, if you didn't know that, I mean, it's not a very big spoiler. He obviously wins the game. But you are rooting for the other characters in this book so much. We see Maceley in this book. We see Amper, people who are also in the games and who Haymitch forms alliances with. And it's just so sad. It's just really sad because you fall in love with these characters who are desperately trying to change the narrative. So Sunrise on the Reaping kind of signifies we don't want the sun to rise on the reaping again. This has to stop, and we're seeing that these games have to stop throughout this. And it's so interesting because we see so many acts of rebellion in this towards the Capitol, and it's interesting because it's how long this rebellion and this rebellious attitude towards the capital has been going on, and it's only 25 years later that something actually happens. But something wouldn't have happened, Katniss wouldn't have been able to kind of bring this whole rebellion without the foundations set before it. And that comes in with a character of Plutarch, who is very interested in not letting the sun rise on the reaping again. And we see those acts of rebellion, and I just wonder, I'm like wondering, when did this start? Like, when did the acts of rebellion kind of really begin? Because we have some really big and some plots against the capital and some really big actions of rebellious nature against the capital. So it's like, when did this begin? Who started this up? Did this happen in Hunger Games prior? Because we don't know this. And it's also showing us that we as the reader don't know. We are subject to propaganda in these other books that we read because we have no idea. It's such a mind game. She plays so many mind games with us, and it's really interesting. In terms of characters, we have some characters that we know, obviously. Ones that I loved and the relationships going into was Plutarch was interesting, seeing how he kind of fitted into the narrative and his kind of character. I'm wondering, because people are saying what the next book is going to be, and I'm hoping she brings out another book because this was amazing, and I do think this was her best writing yet. Personally, I mean, I love the Hunger Games and the story, but I think writing wise and story, I do think that this was the best one yet, and I love the Hunger Games. I'm wondering whose book she's going to write next. Now, everybody is saying it's going to be Phoenix, which is interesting, and I seriously think could be a contender for the next book. And it's also going into another district, District 4, which would be interesting because all of the other books so far have been set in District 12. So I feel like we know District 12 and we're well aware of what's going on in District 12. It would be interesting to see how the oppression is in other districts. So I feel like that would be a good one. And we've also been in the capital a little bit with Snow as well in the other book. But I'm thinking, hot take, that the next book could be Plutarch's, and how he kind of rises and leads the rebellion from behind, because he's literally within the capital. He was a game maker, but he's a troublemaker as well as a game maker, and it would be really interesting to see how his storyline evolves, and I think that would come for a really good book. So I think it's either going to be Phoenix or Plutarch's, but we don't see Phoenix in this book, but we do see Plutarch. Other characters that we meet and fall in love with, especially I loved Mags and the way that she was just so kind and loving towards Haymitch and was just that motherly figure that he needed when he couldn't have a motherly figure because he was taken away from his family. I'm not going to spoil a lot of these things because so many things happen in this book and I was just like mind blown. One of the facts being how Haymitch actually enters the games, because he's not actually reaped. And that literally happens in the first chapter, and literally there's so many plot twists and turns, and I'm literally like, what is going on? Every second I was just putting the book down like existential crisis mode, because she can just do that to you. It was a complete page turner, and I just didn't want to put this down, especially when it got into the games. I mean, they were brutal. I mean, every games are brutal, but this games, I don't know, they just felt like the worst games that we've seen so far. It was a lot. And we fall in love with so many characters. I loved Macely, Lulu, Luella. I loved Ampert's death in the arena. Oh my god. Oh, I think those pages are wet with my tears because that was a lot. But it was just such an incredible read, and one that I would just recommend to so many people. Obviously it's YA, so it's very easy to read. It's just a page turner, and I feel like because I've grown up, and so many people my age now have grown up with these books, grown up with these stories, grown up with the movies, and the movies did an incredible job, I have to say. And I'm really looking forward to the movie of this one, because I know there will be a movie, and I'm like, who's gonna play who? This is gonna be so interesting. But just growing up with this and having another book come out, and I feel like everyone was so excited for it. I was seeing midnight events taking place for the launch, and I feel like on TikTok and on Book Talk, everyone is literally talking about this book because it's been long awaited, and it is just one that captures everybody's hearts because it's so heartbreaking. But under the surface, Suzanne Collins does a great way of telling us what's going on in our society. And actually, guys, know what I'm saying underneath these pages, and there's a political message underneath these pages, and it's whether you pick up on it. And I think we do, especially with those quotes at the beginning of the novel. It's like, okay, understood, Suzanne, I will take that into account. So it was just such an amazing book. And Hamish as well. I feel like I haven't talked about Hamish in this. You fall in love with him. It breaks your heart to see how he goes from this young, healthy boy in love to obviously what we see him as, because we know what he ends up as, I think, which makes this story even more tragic. We know he ends up a drunk and completely traumatized by what's gone on in this book, and because we know how he ends up, I feel like this hits even harder. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting read. I loved it. I honestly would pay anything to go back and not know what this is about and reread it again from a fresh perspective, because it was so good. This is definitely a 5-star read, 100%. I mean, I do love The Hunger Games, don't get me wrong, but this was 100% a 5-star. I just loved it, and I would recommend it to anybody if you have read or haven't read The Hunger Games. But if you haven't read The Hunger Games and you haven't watched the films, then you need to read The Hunger Games before this. I do think the publication order is the way that you should read this, because there's so many nuggets of information that you can just pick up, like especially in regards to the Hunger Games trilogy, but also the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. You're like, oh my goodness, now it's all connecting, all the dots are joining. So definitely, if you haven't read the other books, read them before, otherwise this is not gonna hit the same way, in my opinion. But overall, that is my review of Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I think probably my favourite read of the year so far, or one of them. I've had some good reads, but maybe my favourite of the year so far. That is it for the video today. Thank you for watching. As always, if you want to support my channel, you can do by looking at my Amazon links and also my Patreon channel. Thank you, bye!